Hi, this is a quick video introduction to using hopwort. In this demonstration I'm going to create a quick pale ale recipe. It's only going to have a couple of malts in there, but I'll show how to change the bitterness and the gravity to hit a target style level, which will all become clear in a minute. First up, you can look for an existing brew that's already been made by somebody. So for example, you could choose one of these, like there's a bitter that's scored an 8.5 out of 10. That might be a good starting point for you, in which case you could just copy this recipe and then customize it to your taste. So just looking at that recipe, that's 2.5 kilos of DME, Irish moss, which is misspelled, some British crystal, and then hops, Ramlin Cross, Centennial, Cascade, Challenger, East Kent Goldings. That's a bit of a mixture of hops, really. I'm after something a bit more simple than that. So I'll start with a new recipe, and I'll call this one Easy Pale Ale. This is going to be in the style of an English special bitter. I find the ordinary bitters are a bit too light. I'm happy with these default stats, so just submit that. With the efficiency, just note that that only applies to grains. So when you're extracting fermentable material out of the grains, that's where that efficiency percentage comes in. But most of this recipe is going to be made with extract, so that doesn't really apply here. But it's a good default. Okay, now we've got a lot of red ink here. That's because we've got no ingredients in that recipe, so it really doesn't match the style guidelines. So it's bound to be red at the moment. So the first thing we need to do is get some fermentables in there. This is going to be I'm going to be using dry malt extract rather than liquid malt extract on this, and I'll start by saying that we're going to add 3 kilos. That's likely to be too much, but it's a good starting point. Okay, so my original gravity would be 1056, which just from brewing before I know is going to be a bit high, but like I said, we'll change that later. Now I want some crystal in there to give it a bit of mouthfeel, and this is where we really start to control the flavour of beer that comes out. I'm going to go with British Crystal 55, just because it's one of my favourites. Adds a nice colour, adds a nice malty flavour, and the mouthfeel that I'm after. And I'm guessing that I probably want 275 grams. Now, as you notice, I've pressed 2, and hopwort has presumed kilograms. This is one of the little features that we've added to it. But once I get up to 27, it realises that you're not going to have 27 kilos of anything in a homebrew situation. And so it switches it to grams automatically. That just saves you typing the sort of 0.275 kilos. Just a little convenience. But if you're not expecting it, it can confuse you at the start. We can see the colour we're going to get out of this beer already. That's not too bad. Something else that I like to add to my beers is torrefied wheat. I think it gives it a sort of crispness, but also I find that it really helps with head formation and head retention. Okay, so we've got our basic malt bill there. 3 kilos of DME, 200 grams of torrefied wheat, and 275 grams of British crystal. Now that brew gravity is certainly going to be too high, but we'll fix that later. It's certainly way too high for the style. But before I go ahead and correct that, I'm going to throw in some hops. We're certainly going to need some hops in there. And this one, I've decided, for the first time ever, I'm going to make a single hop summer, sorry. It's a hop that I'm not particularly familiar with, and so this could be a real good beer. Now I'm guessing that we're going to need 30 grams, and that's my bittering addition, so that's going to take 60 minutes. I don't know much about summer hops, but the alpha is 6%, so 30 grams isn't going to give us a lot of bitterness. And so looking over at the red ink, our IBUs are a mere 9.37, and the style is 25. When I add my flavouring and aroma additions, that's going to go up, but almost certainly we're going to have to revisit that. So let's add the flavour. It's going to be all summer, and I want a lot of flavour out of this, so I'm going to go with 30 grams at 15 minutes. Let's watch what that does to the bitterness. It goes from 9 to 14. It's still nowhere near, so we're going to have to change that. But let's get some aroma in there as well. By putting them in now, it means that we're less likely to overshoot later. Because I'm not going to change these, because they're not really contributing to the bitterness level. Instead, that 60-minute addition is the one that we need to change. So that only added a tiny 0.2 in terms of IBU, so it's still nowhere near. At this point, we've got 0% alcohol, so let's just throw a yeast in there as well. Now, I'm a big fan of SF4 English ale yeast. One of the reasons is that it's really cheap, and when you're making a recipe that you're not too attached to, something where you're experimenting. In this case, I'm experimenting with summer hop. This is a good cheap way to play with it. If I really like this recipe, then I can always replace it with a more refined yeast, one of the liquid culture yeasts. But for now, I'm happy to just go with the good old blue packet, as it's often known. Okay, our recipe is still way off the mark. The original gravity is too high, the final gravity is too high, there's way too much alcohol, and the IBUs are absolutely nowhere near. So we need to start changing things. Now, because the IBUs also don't just relate to the hops, but they also relate to the gravity of the wort and how much malt you've got in there, that's the first thing we're going to correct. So with the DME, we'll start by making a big change. We'll go from 3 kilos to 2 kilos. Now the screen updates live. We don't need to navigate away from the screen and come back. So just by replacing a 3 with a 2, you can see that the original gravity is now 1044, which is well within the style, and so that part of the red ink has disappeared. The alcohol is now 4.46, which is absolutely banging the range for style, so that's all good. And of course the IBUs have actually increased, even though we added no more hops. The IBUs have actually gone up because we've taken out some of the malt. Now I'm thinking I'd actually like that alcohol a bit higher. I think I'd actually like that at about 5%. So I'm going to go from 2.1 kilos to 2.2. By changing it to 2.2, the gravity has jumped up, it's now 10.047, and the alcohol is 4.7, which is actually higher than the style, so really I'm making a ESB if I make it up to 5%. Let's try 2.4 kilos and see how that takes us. Okay, now we're up to 5.1, so we've slightly overshot. I'm guessing 2.3, 4.99. That's close enough in my book. It means I have exceeded the style guide, but that's okay. I'm 1 point over on the gravity, which is negligible, and I am 0.3% higher on the alcohol, which is really a breach of style, but I don't mind. I'm sure it's going to be a fine beer. But my IBUs are still too low. So for that I need to change my bittering addition. So currently it's 30 grams. Let's try it with 40 and see what that does. So it goes from 18.74 to 22.8. Still too low, so let's go with 50 grams. So with each change, your browser communicates back to the server and gets updated statistics, and so there's a little lag there depending on your connection speed. Also, I've got other software running here, including the screen capture software. Okay, so our original gravity is one spot over. Our alcohol is really close to 5%, which is a bit high for style, but it's okay because that's my preference. IBUs, we're up to 26.8. That should make for a pretty sharp true English bitter or English pale ale. So at the moment I'm happy with that recipe, and I will finish here. I hope that has helped you, and tune into the next videos where I'll show you how to customize ingredients and how to reuse them in future recipes. Thanks.